Well, good afternoon. My name is Lee Stevenson Cobb, and I'm on the board of the Kiawah Conservancy. And I'm delighted to welcome you all to our first Conservation Matters presentation of the season and our first virtual Conservation Matters presentation. Today, we are absolutely delighted to introduce you to Dennis Liu. He is Vice President of Education for the E.O. Wilson Center for Biodiversity. Dennis is a nationally recognized expert in science education. He directed the production and education at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute before joining the foundation as Vice President of Education. And in this role, Dennis continues to build the Half Earth Project Educator Ambassador Initiative, which launched at Half Earth Day in 2018, which I was fortunate enough to attend. So welcome, Dennis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Lee. Thanks for that nice introduction. And it was great to get this invitation. And, you know, I know this Q&A that we're having here follows a talk that you invited me to give. So hopefully folks have been able to view that and get some introductory information, you know, about Half Earth and how we like to connect with organizations like Kiawah Conservancy.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We were delighted to connect, and we're delighted that you were willing to participate in this.
Threats to the natural world are multiplying. Species are going extinct at an alarming rate.
Unless we move quickly to protect global biodiversity, we will soon lose most of the species composing life on Earth.
But there's a solution. It's called Half Earth. If we conserve half the land and sea, we can still safeguard the bulk of our planet's biodiversity. But what would Half Earth look like? How do we get there? By mapping our planet's biodiversity in fine detail, and in relation to human activities, we can pinpoint the best places to conserve the maximum number of species. Mindful of our ever-changing world, we can identify wildlife corridors and other management solutions that can help sustain biodiversity. With the right information to guide effective conservation efforts, we have the opportunity to support the most biodiverse places in the world, as well as the people who call these paradises home. The Half Earth Project is working to engage people everywhere in why these places are special and how they can best be managed to protect life on Earth. Through cutting-edge technology, we're mapping the magnificent global web of biodiversity with unprecedented resolution and providing scientific leadership and actionable guidance for conservation to achieve the goal of Half Earth.
We can share this precious planet of ours. All life can prosper. It would be humanity's greatest achievement.
Can we really save half the Earth? Yes, we can if we want to.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Dennis Liu with the Half Earth Project of the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation. Thanks for watching this video, and thank you to the Kiawah Conservancy for inviting me to give this talk. My goal in the next 30 minutes or so is to give you, a little more in-depth sense of the mission of the Half Earth Project and the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation, and hopefully some sense of how Kiawah Island and maybe even you personally might fit into what we're trying to do. I've not had the good fortune to visit Kiawah Island. I know that it's a barrier island, which is a extremely special place, a very dynamic environment. I know some of that shifting dynamism is something that can be sometimes challenging to live with, but it creates an incredible diversity. I've just put on this opening slide some examples of species that are, I'm sure, familiar to anyone, any residents or anyone who had visited Kiawah Island. You have these beautiful painted buntings. You have bobcats, which is really interesting, hard to find mammal. You have these incredible charismatic red knots. And then, in fact, I guess you also have alligators. So it's an amazing array of species that you have on Kiawah Island. I'm hoping as I give this talk that you'll be thinking about how things are connected and connectivity of all life on the planet. And our project is aimed at giving people a lens on the importance of the biodiversity that they live with and interact with, but also see how it fits in to a global crisis, in fact, in biodiversity. So there is a biodiversity crisis. I'm not going to belabor this point. The main thing I want to say is there's a general awareness that extinction rates are up, and there's a fair amount of talk about extinction. The problem with that is that extinction is the end of an irreversible process. So what we're really experiencing now, and you've probably in the last couple of years heard some of these stories, they've got a lot of media attention. We're experiencing accelerating declines in abundance of animals. So for example, I know there's beautiful birds on your island. I know there's a lot of birders who come to the island and live on the island. These birds, many of these species are not immediately threatened for extinction, but even these what we think of as common birds, the populations are reducing at alarming numbers. And birds are popular, they're charismatic, they're beautiful, they're easy to identify with, they have lots of fans. Bugs, insects, the invertebrates, slightly different realm. These are, as E.O. Wilson says, these are the little things that run the world. In fact, they're the ones that are making everything work. They are also suffering declines. And, you know, let me just give you an example this is what's called a range map. So you can see on the right, the green is everywhere you expect to see the bobcat. So if you were to look at this map, you might think, look at that huge range. This animal has lots of places to live. But of course, these are all the places that a bobcat can find a good habitat to live in. The numbers of bobcats are not necessarily healthy. And again, in principle, I've been all over this country in places I could see bobcats, but because they're both elusive and becoming increasingly rare, I've not had the good fortune to see a bobcat. So again, I hope that I can come to Kiawah Island and see your bobcats one of these days. So there's lots of conservation organizations out there. The Half Earth Project, what we're trying to do is build a movement culture. And obviously, teachers, young people, all sorts of people are important, and we want to engage everyone in the notion of Half Earth. So we have a number of programs and initiatives to accomplish this. We are actively working, supporting the discovery of new species. Our currently most intense project is to map biodiversity, because life on this planet is not evenly distributed. As I said, you have all sorts of things living on Kiawah Island that are not living near me here in Maryland. We obviously want to inspire and educate both the general public, students and teachers, but also conservationists, scientists, people who work on these issues. And it's important that we build community. We want to be an umbrella organization, a rallying call for many diverse conservation efforts. And therefore, we want to give people tools to prioritize the sort of conservation actions that are actually taken. The name Half Earth really comes from E.O. Wilson's book that he published in 2017. And, you know, I think he says it best at the beginning of the book. Half Earth is different from other conservation efforts. It's a goal. People understand and prefer goals. They need a victory, not just news that progress is being made. It's human nature to yearn for finality, something achieved by which their anxieties and fears are put to rest. What I experience when I go around talking to people about the Half Earth Project, again, particularly students and teachers, is that young people in particular are stimulated by this idea. They're excited by the idea of here's a goal, here's something we can actually work toward. So I think Ed has an excellent instinct. He wrote this book to inspire people, and what we're trying to do with our project is to actually make programs to make, put programs together to make Half Earth a reality. Now, one of the things that Ed Wilson likes to say and point out to people, and he's done this in his writing and in talks that he gives, is that we actually live on a little explored planet. Now, if you were a live audience, this is where I would ask people to raise their hands or shout out, how many species do you think there are on this planet? It turns out that the short answer is we don't know. The estimate is between 20 and 30 million species on the planet. And I'm talking about things, not bacteria. So yes, little tiny things that live in the soil, things that live in pond scum, all those variety of larger things larger than bacteria. So yes, lots of insects are yet to be discovered. What we do know is the names and some description of nearly 2 million species. Now, for example, a brand new species of bat has just been described for the first time for science in Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique. And in fact, it's been named after E.O. Wilson. That effort has taken years. You have to identify the species, and you have to log its characteristics. You have to make sure, you have to do literature searches, you have to compare it to related species to make sure you actually have a new species. Now, this fact that we live on a little explored planet has other ramifications as well. It also means that because of the unprecedented impact that humans are having on the natural environment, species actually are going extinct before we get a chance to name them or describe them. And I just wanted to give you a dramatic, almost example of this occurred in Ecuador in 2018, when this beautiful hummingbird, now named the blue-throated hill star, was discovered. And when this hummingbird was discovered, it was estimated that there was only a few hundred specimens living in a very specific area. So this is what you would call a rare species, a range-limited species. It lives in a very specific area, and that area, in fact, at the time this species was discovered, was threatened by logging. Now, the good news is conservation efforts, in fact, work, and for now, this population of newly discovered hummingbird seems to be stabilized and conservation efforts are working. Part of the goal of the Half Earth Project is to be an umbrella for these various conservation efforts to make everyone understand that it can add up to this goal of half Earth. So I just wanted to quickly frame why we should care about biodiversity in general. There, again, in the context of Kiawah Island, I think most of you are nature lovers. You're there because it's beautiful. There's the beach, there's the ocean, there's forests, there's alligators, there's golf courses, there's lots of beautiful landscape. Biodiversity, of course, refers specifically to the things that have evolved and adapted to live in a particular place over thousands and even millions of years. And it's important to understand that there's ethical and utilitarian reasons to take care of this biodiversity. So, you know, the aesthetic and ethical reasons, nature is beautiful. I think it's important to acknowledge that. Species are fascinating. That turns out to be the way I was drawn into all these things. I'm a scientist by training, a curious person by nature. I just find observing and learning things about the incredible diversity of life on our planet to be a really rewarding thing to do. Species also have a right to exist. This is acknowledged across many different cultures and traditions. We should have stewardship over this biodiversity. Who are we to say what has the right to exist or not exist, or to exist only for our own purposes? On the other hand, it's important to know that it goes beyond just aesthetics and ethics. There's utilitarian reasons that we should value biodiversity. And the short version of this is that we absolutely depend on healthy, functioning nature for clean air, for water, for food, for energy. And the fact is, we actually don't, a corollary of not knowing all the species on the planet is that we don't know what most of them do. So we've documented nearly 2 million. The in-depth knowledge we have, the truly in-depth knowledge we have of the role that these species play is probably more like in the hundreds of species that we understand at a really detailed level. And of course, there's all sorts of specializations, specialized things that we get from nature. I could give a whole talk on the connection between nature and medicine and how we learn about health and medicine from nature. But again, as usual, Ed says it very poetically in Half Earth. He sums up the aesthetic point of view. Each species is a wonder to behold, a long, brilliant history in itself to read, a champion emerged in our time after a long struggle of thousands or millions of years, best of the best, an expert specialist in the niche of the natural environment in which it lives. So every species living today has come through a long evolutionary history to arrive where it's at, to occupy its niche, to do its job out there in the ecosystem. And it really is an amazing thing to discover how these species play their role. On the utilitarian side, again, it is poetic. Biodiversity as a whole forms a shield protecting each of the species that together compose it, including ourselves. What will happen if, in addition to the species we've already lost, extinguished by human activity, 10% of those remaining are taken away, or 50%, or 90%? As more and more species vanish or drop to near extinction, the rate of extinction of the survivors accelerates. So we're all in this together. Humans are part of nature. All the species together make the whole biosphere stronger. They make everything work. Now, the most common things that come to people's mind when they first hear about Half Earth is why half? And then the next question is, which half? And I always wonder, is it my half? This slide summarizes very succinctly. I just want to make the point that half as a goal is not just sort of a rounding thing. It's not a metaphor. It's really based on science. It is obviously averaged over many, many studies that cover the whole globe. So if you consider the Earth as a whole, this 50% number works very well. All the science points to 50% of the land and the oceans conserved will yield us protection for 85% of the species. And it's further estimated that 85% of the species gets us the full ecological functions that we depend on. Now, which half is a much trickier question because, as I mentioned earlier, life is not evenly distributed on the planet. So there's rare species in some places, there's a richness, high number of species in other places. And so the way we build these protected areas requires further science, including computer science, to help us think about these problems. And furthermore, there's another question of what counts. So is it just acquiring new land to protect, or are there other ways that we can contribute to half-Earth? And the short answer to that question is yes, there are other ways. And in fact, Kiawah Island is conducting many of these things by studying species on the island and by doing a number of things to protect these species, not necessarily simply putting land into protection and keeping people out. Now, to answer these more nuanced questions, it turns out that a map is extremely important, probably essential to do that. So one of the major projects we're undertaking is to develop the half-Earth map. And I'm just going to show you real quickly a quick demo of this map. You can see it's a 3D globe. The dots you're seeing are places that we've already identified as priority places where the biodiversity is so rich, we need to save it. But how do we determine that those are the right places, and how do we add places to prioritize? Well, we use data from 3 different layers. Biodiversity is one layer. And so here you can see what's the richness look like on a global scale. Here's protection, so the areas that are already underprotected. And as we spin the globe here, you can see that there's protected areas, a patchwork of protected areas on the land and in the sea. I'm actually going to zoom in here. Hopefully you recognize Amazonia there, down in South America. And you can see that as I clicked on the community-based conservation areas, you get a lot of protected area added in Amazonia. And Kiawah Island, for example, has community-based protected areas that we would also like to be able to add to our map so that we get a full accounting. The current level of protection globally for all of the lands across the planet is on the order of about 15%. So we have a long way to go to get to half. Now, I'm actually the vice president for education. And so for me, an extremely part of building this movement culture is to inspire the next generation of planetary stewards. And the reality is that basically going to school is kids' jobs. They are a captive audience. And teachers need new tools to bring this kind of information to their students. And the reality is you have to work with the constraints of the current system to try and get this kind of information to students. But there's a real hunger out there by both teachers and students for this sort of information that focuses on biodiversity, ecology, and conservation. So we have an ambassador program, the Half-Earth Project Educator Ambassador Program. To date, we have about 500 ambassadors signed up. We add ambassadors every week. The majority are high school level instructors, but we have lots of ambassadors who are middle school teachers and college professors. We have a weekly newsletter where we share information and new resources. We have a Facebook group because we're trying to build community. We want ambassadors to share their ideas, to ask questions. And what I'm showing here is that we don't just, in the case of education, it's not a matter of here's this map, use this map. It's important to use the best current educational standards. So we link our work to the next generation science standards. And for example, hands-on work and teamwork is extremely important and has a way appealing to diverse learners, which is an extremely important issue in classrooms today. So in the case of Half Earth, it's much more engaging for students to be challenged to create your own solution to Half Earth. And when you're challenged to design your own solution, it leads to lots of questions and hopefully some research. Who are the stakeholders? How do I use a map? What sort of information do I need to put on the map? Where do I find out about the distribution of species? Who owns the land? How is land even used currently? All these questions come up in the activities that we've designed prior to going to the digital Half Earth map. Then when students go to the Half Earth map, again, we want them to have a sort of guided inquiry experience. So in this case, I'm going to turn on the Hummingbird map, part of the map. And I hope you noticed that what got lit up was the Americas. And when you spin the globe, what you find out is no place else on the planet are there hummingbirds. That it is a new world group of beautiful, charismatic birds. And so all the richness and rarity is in our part of the world. I'm going to just zero in for a quick second here on one hopefully very familiar hummingbird, the ruby-throated hummingbird. Now, again, when I'm teaching, I would have asked, how many species of hummingbirds do you think there are? So in that heat map from Half Earth that went by so quickly, you could see there were species. Hopefully you noticed that there were lots of species in Amazonia and lots of species along the Andes Mountains. And it turns out there's over 300 species of hummingbirds. Guess how many we have here in the eastern part, and that includes South Carolina, the eastern part of the United States. We have one species of hummingbird. It's the ruby-throated hummingbird. This is data from our data partners for the Half Earth map, the Map of Life team. These are the scientists who gather the data that we use for the Half Earth map. And what this is showing, and a fantastic part of modern day science, which is that you've got experts and combining their work with citizen science. So all these gray dots here, some of them are observations made by experts, some of them are observations made by citizen scientists. And you can see that the expert range map overlaps well with where actual observations of hummingbirds are made. Now, hummingbirds allow me to make a really important point about connectivity, and that is this phenomenon, which again, Kiawah Islanders are familiar with, I'm sure, and that's annual migration cycles. And birds, many species of birds are just champion migrators. So this dynamic animation that is taken from citizen science data from the Lab of Ornithology, Cornell's Lab of Ornithology, shows the annual migration pattern of the ruby-throated hummingbird. So you can see here in the wintertime, the birds are in Central America. And then as spring approaches and summer, there's this almost explosive migration that fills the United States and goes all the way up into Canada. So amazing for this little bird to be doing this kind of amazing migration. Now the key point here is that this bird can be found where I live. It can be found on Kiawah Island. It can be found in Mexico and Central America. So what part of this bird's habitat is important to preserve? Could we, if we were thinking of somehow saving half of its habitat, which half would you choose? I hope you can see, I hope you can reason through to see that you can't simply save for a migratory species. All of these locations are important because some are for nesting and breeding. some are for feeding in the winter. So you have to consider the full range, and this immediately gets you beyond state borders and national borders, and you have to have a global perspective. Now, I wanted to just show you another example, well, a little closer to home, but also to show that the pattern is different for every single species. So again, this is a range map from our data partners at the Map of Life, and you can see that you know, up where I live, for example, I have very little opportunity to see the painted bunting. But along the southeast coast of the United States, in particular where you are on Kiawah Island, I think you're blessed with lots of opportunity to see these birds. And in fact, I know that you have a banding project. I know these birds visit feeders. Again, it's one of those that I hope to see someday. Here you can see the point observations has a good correspondence with the expert range maps. And here's what the abundance, seasonal migration abundance pattern looks like for the painted bunting. Very different than the pattern for the ruby-throated hummingbird. So every species has its particular needs, and this is the kind of thing that we have to take into account when we're thinking about protecting a given species. Again, the wintering, the breeding areas, and the nesting areas, all extremely important for every species. Now, I've heard from, and at the end of this talk, I hope you'll stay tuned, because Lee Cobb and I are gonna have some discussion, and Lee's gonna ask some questions, but Lee had told me that the red knots are extremely popular on the island. And this is another, I mean, this bird is really amazing. So I just showed you two champion migrators, the ruby-throated hummingbird and the painted bunting. Well, basically, the red knot puts those birds to shame. And in fact, it migrates over such a huge dispersed zone that I can't even actually show you the animation for it. The dots are too small. You wouldn't really be able to see it. But you can see that, I hope you can see on this slide that, you know, you see these red knots on the beach, but they have all these flyover stopping areas, and then they're nesting places way up in the Arctic. These are also amazing birds in the sense that as they migrate, they fly extremely high up in the atmosphere at a level where the oxygen is so thin. It's just really kind of amazing. And I have to say, in reading about the red knots, they're often compared to an avocado, but it's strange days in the grocery stores. So these days, so this is a tiny avocado, and I thought it was more appropriate to compare it to this big, beautiful peach. And what's often said when you read about red knots is that when they fatten up, they get to the size and weight of this peach. And then by the time they make it up to their nesting grounds in the Arctic, they are half the size of the peach. They have lost that much weight. So the places they stop on their migration are extremely important to them. The species is not going to survive if you disrupt this whole supporting migration system. And this is, again, this is a map from a range map from the Map of Life team. And you can see all the various places that this is primarily a coastal species, but with this important nesting area up in the Arctic. I wanted to show you another feature from another partner we work with, which is the Encyclopedia of Life. And this is what they call a trophic web. And again, when it comes to, I put red knots at the center of this trophic web. And what it shows you is the various interactions. So peregrine falcons feed on red knots, for example. And then you can see the things that red knots feed on, and you can see the things that compete with red knots for food or even for nesting sites and other things. But what's great is that this web is interactive. So I like this for students to show them how things are connected. And really, as you start to interact with these webs, you start to see how everything is connected, and you can march through the entire tree of life and see how connected everything is. I think I'm going to do one. Yeah, let's look at the diamond turbot is one of the things that actually red knots feed on, and you can see that actually it's a competitor. You can see it's at the center of many, many things. So, you know, I've mentioned several different resources. The best place, I hope that you will tell all your friends, your neighbors about the Half Earth Project. I'm of course particularly interested if you know teachers, if you know students. I hope that you'll consider looking at the resources that we have to offer. I just wanted to give a quick little tour of the educational resources on the website here. Here's the mapping design challenge I was talking about. We have all sorts of material on beavers, on owls. We've developed a reading list, including ways to use these chapters in your teaching. We have bird-friendly coffee is extremely important for some of these migratory species that I've been discussing. So I hope that you'll visit the website. I thought I'd end here with a few resources that you can consider. I'll leave this up as I quickly. Obviously, the foundation has a web page. The project has a web page, and that's the best place. The Half Earth Project is the best place to find the map. I hope you'll go and explore the map on your own. There's that page I just showed you of educational resources. And as you click on each one of those, you'll find more and more resources on a particular topic. And of course, you can take the Half Earth Pledge and join us in this effort to protect half the planet for the rest of nature. I would love to hear from any of you with further questions or comments. So my email is there at the bottom. So I want to thank you so much for your attention and for the opportunity to talk to you today. Thanks so much. And now I'm going to do just a hot off the press bonus part of my talk. Ed has written on the order of 30 books, incredibly influential because of their combination of in-depth science expressed in a poetic way. One of my favorite books of Ed, probably my favorite book of Ed, is called Naturalist. It was published over 25 years ago. It's really his memoir. It's the story of how a young snake-obsessed Boy Scout grew up to be one of the most influential conservation and thinkers of our time. I also wanted to point out, obviously, there's the Half Earth book. Ed has also written a book called Letters to a Young Scientist that is explicitly meant to encourage young people to follow their passion, most particularly, obviously, if they're interested in biodiversity. It's all sorts of advice on how you can find your way. But the exciting news I wanted to mention here is that Naturalist will be coming out in the fall. The publication date is for November of 2020. And it's a graphic version of the Naturalist, so it's been condensed down to just a little over 200 pages. And I'm excited about this. I'm working with teachers right now to develop ways of using this in their classrooms. And I just want to leave you with a quick taste of what this looks like. What I find charming about the book is obviously Ed's beautiful words are preserved, but the writers have really chosen well. The graphic artist has done an amazing job of interpreting this story. And I love the way Ed is present at different ages. So you have older Ed reflecting back, present it with his childhood memories. And I love this one panel on the lower right where young Ed is literally handing over information, a discovery that current Ed still uses. So there, that's just my little bonus ending. And again, thank you so much for your attention, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
I love your presentation. I love the concept of half Earth. And, you know, I thought one of the things I found very compelling in the book was the concept, the acronym Hippo. I just thought that said a lot in a very easily understood way. So could you say a few words about Hippo, please?
Yeah, you know, you had given me a heads up that you were going to ask about Hippo. So I put together a little slide that I think it'll help sort of stick in people's mind. It's a handy acronym. So I'm going to go ahead and share some share my screen here. Yeah. So Hippo is an acronym that Ed uses, and he talks about it in his book, Half Earth. And you know, and it's really meant to sum up the various the threats of human impact on the natural world, on all the other species besides us. And so, you know, Hippo stands for habitat destruction, invasive species, pollution, population pressure, and overhunting. And I think it's important actually that habitat destruction is at the top. That's probably, as far as biodiversity goes, that may be the single most important factor. You know, and what's also good about it is that there's things we can do both locally, regionally, and globally to try and reverse or prevent habitat destruction. You know, when I first started paying attention to environmental issues many years ago, pollution was a really big topic. And all these factors are important. They're all playing a real role. I put together just a few images so people could get a sense, even though I think most of these things are pretty common sense. I did wanna, so these two images, the one on the left that looks like a giant cleared field, that is a clearing for the production of palm oil. So a native forest, very balanced, rich in biodiversity, has been essentially plowed over to make a monoculture of palm oil. So that's a very severe example of habitat destruction. But I also wanted to include this beautiful suburban home and lawn and landscaping because, of course, even the places we live can result in species displacement and habitat destruction. So there's a whole variety of things that fit that. Invasive species, most people are familiar with some invasive species. On the left, this is kudzu growing on a landscape. In the middle, I've got the European starling, which is an introduced species. Some people estimate that if you were to count all the birds in the United States, the largest population of birds, individual birds, would probably be European starlings, and they are an invasive species. And then the other plant I included because, you know, where I live in the Washington, D.C. area, Japanese knotweed is an important invasive species. So invasive species can, of course, crowd out native species, compete with native species. And even if a species is not terribly invasive, it generally was not going to provide the kind of food that a native species would, for example. So at the very least, it's out of balance with native species, but sometimes horribly out of balance with really significant consequences. And then pollution comes in many forms. You know, I would say, again, when I was growing up, chemical pollution was one of the main emphasis, you know, sewage, industrial effluent. But now, of course, we know that it turns out plastic pollution is pervasive. So not just this very visible ugliness on a beach, but the fact that as plastic keeps breaking down, it almost can become pervasive in the environment. And then, of course, again, in my entire life, we've been talking about population and continuing pressure of population. And one of the main points I'd like to make about population, because when I talk to students about this, if I say, you know, if I talk about human impact on nature, there is a tendency for people to think of cities and to recognize that a city displaces what we think of as the natural environment. But the actual direct footprint of cities is small. So it's the multiplication out. It is true that directly where we live and how we live does have a local impact on nature, but there's a much broader impact of population because of all the goods that we need, the pollution that we produce, and importantly, the food that we eat. So agriculture, the various food systems to support the population is what probably has the biggest impact on the environment. So this little image that's probably hard to see, those are vast fields of waste tomatoes and green beans that simply cannot find their way in the marketplace, and for a variety of reasons have to at best get composted, at worst simply destroyed. And then the last letter, the O in Hippo, is overhunting. And you know, that's I think you could also think of it as over harvesting, but it's basically the overly intensive use of natural resources. In the case of hunting, and you know, I want to make the point that hunting is not necessarily a negative thing. So it's how you hunt, how hunting is regulated, how intensive, and of course, the specific species that the hunting targets. So, you know, we know that one of the most worldwide, a very damaging form of hunting is poaching, say in national parks, where even protected species may be hunted or trapped. And then in the oceans, over harvesting of fish, you know, which has resulted, in fact, you know, again, it's not just about extinctions, but it's about a loss of abundance of many species. And in the case of fish, the pressure has been so intensive on some species that the average size of fish keeps reducing. So you have fewer fish, and it's very hard to find the big ones because there's so much fishing pressure. So anyways, there's a little, I feel like that was a bit of a mini lecture on Hippo, but did you have any other questions?
No, thank you. I think that's incredibly helpful. And I do encourage people to actually read Dr. Wilson's book as well, but that's, I think, a very useful way to look at the issues broadly. The other thing, another thing I wanted you to maybe talk about is how I love the mapping that you all are doing and identification of areas that are significantly biodiverse and also at risk. But I'm also interested in the community aspect of this. And as you mentioned, yards. And I know that you know and have done some work with Doug Talamay, who has spoken at Kiawah, and hopefully will come back for we will be able to reschedule the symposium with him, and you can be part of that. But I think for folks on Kiawah, the community aspect of this, and how do we become part of Half Earth, or what we as Kiawah residents or part-time residents can do to support your efforts.
No, that's a really important question. And we're the sort of conservation organization, the Half Earth Project and the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation. We really want to be an umbrella for a whole variety of conservation activities. And I just want to say, having gotten this invitation and gotten to know, haven't visited yet, but having gotten to know Kiawah Island and the work of the Conservancy, you're just the sort of community and place that we want to welcome into Half Earth. And, people want to know, I think, people want to know, are we doing the right thing? How do we contribute? And understandably, I think this is totally legitimate. You should get credit for the good work that you're already doing. So I often get asked, why half, which I sort of addressed in the talk, which half, which is about prioritizing. And then there's this important kind of third question of what counts. And from what I've learned about Kiawah and Kiawah Conservancy, you're doing lots of things that count. So, you alluded to our map, and the map is really this digital globe we've created, which everyone can go visit. If you just look up, Half Earth map or Half Earth project, you'll be able to find this digital map. And there's three key layers on this map. There's biodiversity, because it's unequally distributed on the planet. So we need to know, where do things live? Where are the rare things? Where are the most species? Those are critical places to save. We also have to know, what's currently protected. And then we need to know, where's the concentrations of human impact, urbanization, agriculture, those sorts of things. So the current map is at a 55-kilometer resolution, and we're trying to get down to a 1-kilometer resolution. And when we get down to that 1-kilometer resolution, then the activities on places like Kiawah Island will really show up nicely as protection. But it's also this thing of what constitutes contributing to half, beyond just saying, it's not just defining land that people can't go or can't use in certain ways. There's other things you can do to really support biodiversity. And I know the Conservancy has really been doing both these things, acquiring and protecting lands, and also encouraging things that people can do that are friendlier towards species and biodiversity. And so some of that part answer to your question of where we're hoping to get to the map is to a resolution where the activity of something like the Kiawah Conservancy will be visible on the map. And then the other piece is this very important piece that at the moment, our map definitely emphasizes publicly protected lands, like national wildlife refuges, national parks. There's an international body that defines levels of protection for landscapes and seascapes that emphasize biodiversity, species protection first. So for now, our map emphasizes those first two categories. And in the United States, we are not going to be able to tell the full story about getting to Half Earth if we don't include private land. So, I kind of put it in this slide here. These four quadrants of this slide sort of represent, it way overgeneralizes, obviously, but in the upper left-hand corner, that's a form of agriculture. You've got cattle. Obviously, you've got very familiar farmland, and you've got an urban landscape, and then you've got sort of an iconic wilderness. Part of our project is absolutely to increase the amount of that beautiful wild land. But you mentioned Doug Tallamy, and there's things we can do to modify the way we use private land. And so the private lands are extremely important, both the land that we are personally in control of, if we're fortunate enough to own a nice piece of property with landscaping, but there's also city parks, schoolyards, and importantly, trusts. I know we probably don't have time to get into detail about how land trusts work, but these trust lands, which can guarantee the protection of certain resources on the land, including species. These are extremely important mechanisms worldwide, but particularly in the United States. These trust lands are really important. So the short answer to your question is, in the next couple years, we are looking to be able to feature more and more of these kind of protection mechanisms on our map, and make sure that Kiawah Conservancy gets credit.
Well, thank you so much. It's an interesting process and obviously evolving, and that the work Doug is doing in encouraging planting of bushes and trees that really support biodiversity, whether it's butterflies or insects or birds. And Kiawah has begun to really look at that. And I give credit to the town as well as the Conservancy, and also to Kika for promoting websites and really helping people learn about native plants and important native plants to plant. Not everything is equal.
Right. Well,
Thank
I
you.
mean, I think that's so, I find that so impressive, the way the way the Conservancy works with the town, and I get a sense that you folks, that the community really embraces this, right? I can tell that for a variety of reasons, the people who live and visit there love this place, right? And I think partly we're just trying to encourage people to almost that next level. Like you look out at the ocean, it's beautiful. You want, like, let's conserve as much of this beach as we can. And we're just saying, take another level down and think of the species that depend on these spaces also. And that will enrich your enjoyment and enrich the land where you're at if you actually take care of those species. And you have so many great ones.
We do. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Shall we look at the map of Kiawah, or?
Yeah, sure. I think that'd be great, because I would love to learn a little more about it. And it's just so great that you have both folks that work with the town and the Conservancy that work together and pay attention to all these things.
We truly are very lucky, and we're I think this map, you can see with the legend what the various areas represent, but we're also, I think it's important to understand that Kiawah has begun to work even beyond the island itself as the island builds out, and the bright pink other preserved lands I think are at some 1,500 acres that are adjacent to the Kiawah River, but not on Kiawah Island proper. And I think we look forward to seeing more of this moving forward and being counted in half Earth as you mentioned. So, thank you.
Well, absolutely. And I like that you included some of the land off the island, because, it's such an important point. Sometimes, like, you could say, let's look at Kiawah Island. Okay, let's take half of the island. Which half would we take and not allow people into, right? And so I think this map makes is a great example of how that's simply not the case. On the scale of Kiawah Island, you have to do an analysis of, well, what lands are most valuable if we're trying to save species and natural habitats, but also it's the science of the solvable, right? I mean, some land, you may want to acquire it, you simply can't. Or you can't get the whole piece, but can you get a couple of pieces? And then it raises all these issues of connectivity,
right. And
you know,
wildlife corridors and
corridors, exactly.
right.
And then you
And
have,
we are, Kiawah is fortunate in that some of the land you can see in the light blue is protected by federal and state law. It's less specific. I've been warned that it's very hard to draw borders on that, but there are protections, state and federal, that go beyond what Kiawah Island itself is doing. So we are very fortunate that this land has been recognized
yeah.
as worth protecting.
Well,
So,
I can tell you this, you know, now that we've engaged with you, I'm definitely going to be talking with the mapping team to do an analysis of Kiawah and see, because I actually think it's a great example for us to look at, to think going forward how we can really better capture the protected status of some of these lands.
and I'm looking forward to your visiting Kiawah. And you
Yeah.
mentioned that in your formal presentation, the bobcats. I certainly hope we have bobcats to show you, as I think you know at this point. We have had a big decrease in our bobcat population, largely due to rodenticides, but the town and Kika and the Conservancy and other groups have really stepped up to really limit these second generation rodenticides that have been so dangerous.
Yeah.
And that's one thing a group like the Conservancy and yours can do, is educate. And that's where your ambassador program comes in. I mean, it's just fabulous to hear about the work you're doing with teachers and students, and because students are the future and we need to engage them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, you know, Ed is, you know, 92 years old, working on at least 2 books at the moment. But, you know, part of the reason he wrote Half Earth was a real sense of urgency, you know, and that we have to declare a goal now. So on the one hand, we're very impatient. At the same time, as the Bobcat story really exemplifies, you know, it's a kind of a never-ending vigilance. Because of Hippo, you know, you can take care of habitat destruction, for example. Like you probably overall, you know, you have habitat that can support a healthy population of bobcats on the island. And I know, as you've mentioned, you've in the past had a healthier population than you currently have. But then something like a rodenticide, essentially a pollutant, and bobcats are an off-target victim of this use of a chemical. Unfortunately, it can come in and reverse all the good work that's been done. So it's really important to have the community awareness and backup, and for organizations like yours to be vigilant, and really be there as a source of information and organizing to see what can be done about these things. So, so again, I think that's a really important point. And because of that, the next generation stewards are really important. We feel a sense of urgency. It's our responsibility. We need to be doing things now, but one of those important things is making sure that current students are getting an education, getting the opportunity to learn and think about these things. So,
Well, thank you, Dennis, for encouraging us all. And I do encourage all the listeners to look at the sites, and also go to the Kiawah Conservancy website as well as the town website, but certainly go to Dennis's, to the Center for Biodiversity's website and click on those links that Dennis has provided. So we hope to see Dennis on island, perhaps next spring. We hope to reschedule the symposium, but we'll get him down there one way or the other. And you take care, and thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
thank you so much, Lee. It's really been a pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.